Let's get right into it. Long before flight became routine, before boarding passes, safety briefings, and smooth takeoffs, flying was not a convenience. It was a mystery. And for centuries, humanity tried to solve that mystery the only way it knew how, by stepping into the air and hoping physics would cooperate. There were no rules, no simulations, no manuals, just ideas, ambition, and gravity waiting patiently beneath it all. This is the story of how humans learn to fly, not through clean equations or perfect designs, but through bodies, failures, and fatal mistakes that forced the sky to reveal its rules one death at a time. We begin with a man who believed falling itself could be made safe. Franz Reichelt. In 1912, Franz Reichelt stood on the first platform of the Eiffel Tower. He was not dressed like a pilot. He looked like an inventor, because he was. A tailor by trade, methodical and precise, obsessed with one terrifying problem. Pilots weren't dying because planes couldn't fly. They were dying because when something went wrong, there was no second chance. Parachutes existed, but they were bulky, unreliable, and often useless at low altitude. Reichelt became convinced the solution wasn't something you carried, it was something you wore. His invention was a wearable parachute suit, fabric folded into layers that would unfurl into wings if the wearer spread their arms. Tests with dummies were inconclusive. Sometimes the suit opened, sometimes it didn't. But Reichelt believed the missing variable was the human body itself. Witnesses that morning described him pacing, adjusting the suit, checking the wind, stepping back from the edge more than once. This was not recklessness. This was belief. When he finally jumped, the failure was immediate and absolute. The fabric collapsed inward instead of billowing outward. The suit was wrapped around him, turning his body into dead weight. There was no glide, no correction, no second phase. He fell almost straight down. The impact crater shocked witnesses. The entire event was filmed. Reichelt didn't die chasing flight. He died trying to make failure survivable. His death proved something aviation would later accept fully. Belief does not substitute for aerodynamics. The human body cannot become a wing by intention alone. And yet, standing on that platform, for a few quiet seconds, he truly believed it could. Otto Lilienthal, the man who flew too well, too soon. Years earlier, another man had come closer than anyone to unlocking the secret of flight. Otto Lilienthal didn't look like a daredevil. He looked like a scientist. His glider flights were controlled, repeatable, and documented, thousands of them. Photographs showed him suspended in midair, wings extended, gliding silently above hillsides. To the public, it looked like freedom. What Lilienthal didn't yet understand was something invisible. Stalls. He understood lift. He understood balance. But he did not yet know that things could suddenly lose lift entirely when airflow separated from their surface. There were no warning signs, no instruments, no recovery techniques. In August of 1896, Lilienthal launched as he had hundreds of times before. Conditions appeared normal, but as the glider slowed, the air betrayed him. Lift vanished, the glider dropped. The fall was only about 15 meters, but momentum ended abruptly. Lilienthal's neck broke. He lingered long enough to understand what had happened. His death taught aviation something chilling. Flight wasn't binary. You didn't simply fly or fall. There were unstable states in between, moments where the sky itself turned hostile without warning. Modern stall recovery exists because Lilienthal died before it did. He didn't fail to fly. He failed because flight had more rules than anyone yet knew. Ornithopters, when copying nature, turned lethal. For centuries, inventors believed the answer to flight was obvious. Birds flap their wings, humans should do the same. Ornithopters, machines with flapping wings, seemed intuitive, but intuition proved deadly. Birds don't just flap. They twist feathers, adjust muscle tension, sense airflow instantly, and make micro-corrections dozens of times per second. Early machines could do none of that. They vibrated, joints failed, Control lagged behind motion. Vince DeGroof's fatal attempt was not dramatic in the way crashes are. It was worse. The machine simply stopped responding. There was no glide, no stall recovery, no warning. One moment he was airborne, the next gravity reclaimed everything. These deaths taught aviation an uncomfortable lesson. Nature's solutions are not easily copied. God had perfected birds. Humans were trying to replicate that with wood, cloth, and hope. Flight would not come from imitation. It would come from invention. Percy Pilcher, when one material decides your fate. Even gliders were unforgiving. Percy Pilcher was one of Britain's most promising aviation pioneers. His designs were serious, his ambitions realistic. In 1899, he demonstrated his glider at Stanford Hall using a method that feels surreal today. The aircraft was towed into air by horses running across a field. The glider rose smoothly, stable, controlled. Then a bamboo support and the tail snapped. There was no redundancy, no backup structure, no margin for error. Pilcher fell roughly 30 feet. He lingered for days before dying from his injuries. What makes his death especially haunting is how close he was to powered flight. Designs recovered after his death suggest he was nearing a breakthrough. Had that single piece of bamboo held, aviation history might look very different. Instead, his death taught engineers a brutal truth. Ideas don't fail, materials do, and flight does not forgive weak links. Catapult launches, when takeoff was an act of violence. By the time engines entered the equation, the danger of flight didn't decrease, it multiplied. Early aircraft were fragile, underpowered, and unstable at low speeds. To solve this, inventors turned to a brutal workaround: external force. If the plane couldn't lift itself, it would be thrown into the air and expected to survive the transition. Catapult launches were not graceful. They were sudden, violent accelerations designed to overwhelm inertia. Wooden frames flexed, fabric skins rippled, control surfaces were tested instantly without warning. Samuel Langley's aerodome embodied this philosophy. Perched on a houseboat, the aircraft was launched forward by a catapult system that left no room for hesitation. There was no rolling takeoff, no chance to abort. Once released, physics took control. Twice, the machine collapsed almost immediately after launch. Wings buckled, structures failed, and Charles Manley, strapped into the craft, was dumped into the river below. He survived, but survival wasn't the point. The point was realization. Launching an aircraft was not simply the beginning of flight. It was the most dangerous moment of all. Modern runways, gradual acceleration, and abort procedures exist because early aviators learned through the near-fatal failure that you cannot bully a machine into the sky and expect it to cooperate. Flight does not respond well to force. Thomas Selfridge, the moment flight became a public responsibility. When Thomas Selfridge died in 1908, aviation crossed an invisible line. Up until that moment, flight had largely been seen as an experimental spectacle. Daring inventors, risk-taking pioneers, personal choice, but Selfridge was a military officer. His death occurred during an official demonstration in front of witnesses under government scrutiny. The failure was sudden and mechanical. A propeller fractured mid-air, sending shards through the structure. Control vanished. The aircraft fell. Orville Wright survived. Selfridge did not. The detail that haunted investigators was simple. Selfridge was not wearing head protection. Early pilots often didn't. The idea of helmets seemed excessive. The air itself was the danger, not impact, or so they believed. After his death, that belief ended. Protective gear became mandatory. Structural redundancy became non-negotiable. Aviation safety was no longer optional or experimental. It became a public obligation. From that moment on, flight stopped being a private gamble. It became a shared risk and therefore a shared responsibility. Harriet Quimby, when the aircraft survives and the pilot does not. Harriet Quimby's death remains one of the most unsettling in aviation history, not because of what failed, but because of what didn't. Her aircraft did not disintegrate, it did not stall, It did not suffer structural collapse. Instead, it pitched forward unexpectedly, just enough to change gravity's direction. That was all it took. There were no modern restraints, no harnesses designed to keep pilots inside violent motion. When the aircraft pitched, Quimby and her passenger were thrown free, separated from the machine, from control, and from survival. They fell. The aircraft came down almost intact. The contrast is chilling. It forced designers to confront a truth that seems obvious now, but wasn't then. Controlling an aircraft means nothing if you don't remain inside it. Harnesses, seatbelts, and cockpit ergonomics were not luxuries. They were survival systems. Quimby's death rewrote how pilots were physically connected to their machines. Flight was no longer just about mastery of the air. It was about staying attached to the moment.